everybody, my name is Alexander Gaston, and welcome to today's episode of Nerd Out, an awesome show where I get to sit down with some people that I have had the privilege of meeting and have conversations about things they love. Why? Because I wanted to. Today, my guest is Cattoo, all the way from Down Under. Couldn't help it. So sorry. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I am over the worst of the jet lag, and I'm okay.
We believe in you.
Yeah, I'm maintaining.
And tell me, Alex, what are we nerding out about today?
Oh, today we are nerding out about horror movies, but in particular, we're nerding out about Australian horror movies.
That's awesome. Yeah, we had the awesome, you were messaging me, and I was talking to you, and I was like, okay, well, what's a list of some horror movies? And you're like, I didn't want to scare you.
Here we go.
I was like, listen, I lost my soul a long time ago. It's fine. So you gave me a list.
Yes.
Of which, out of everything in the past week, I've been able to watch one movie.
I mean, it's better than none.
And it was the new LGBTQ icon movie, yes. The Babadook.
The Babadook.
The Babadook. And I messaged you a couple times during it.
Yes, you did.
I tried so hard not to, but at the same time, I was at home by myself, and I was just ironing curtains because that's stuff that I do.
That's what you do.
Yeah, and watching the Babadook, and was like, this kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So talk to me about. You go after it.
Okay, so the Babadook is not actually a gay icon. That was a misfiling on Netflix's behalf that we have now embraced. So I'm sure there are some people out there who have watched the Babadook expecting a markedly different movie.
Yeah.
So the
Where's
Babadook.
the love story?
Yeah, right. Where is the romantic love story? And oh God, what is happening?
Where's the heated passion scene? Why is there blood everywhere?
Why is everybody screaming?
Why is
it sounds like my love life. But is a fantastic Australian horror film about a mother and son who are trying to cope with life after the son's father, after the husband has died 7 years on, when a malevolent presence invades their house and heartwarmingly brings them closer together after several blood, guts, mishaps.
And something I found out.
Yes.
It's where that meme comes from with the mom who's screaming at the kid in the back seat. Why can't you be more normal? And they're like,
and the kid's screaming. Yes.
And it's
that
usually,
is that kid.
And it's usually like superimposed with a British flag on the mom's face and a US flag on the kid's face.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or any other variation thereof. Yes, that is what that is from.
I was very excited to see that.
That kid. Yeah. Phenomenal young actor. Absolutely killed it. But yes, that kid. So the story is this single mother whose husband died in a car accident is dealing with this child who is not normal in the slightest. This kid is a bit of a handful.
I said he was a twat.
Yes, you said he was a twat. I was looking at the messages today because you messaged me this morning and I was reading back through them.
And all I got in response was her.
Yes,
her.
because I didn't want to give anything away.
I know.
Because obviously the story develops. Are we doing spoilers or no spoilers?
Listen, if you haven't watched The Babadook by now,
go watch it, come back.
Go watch it, come back.
Yeah. Okay, we're doing spoilers. Great.
I'll give you a second. Okay, we're good.
Great. Okay. Okay, spoilers from here on out.
Yeah, nothing but spoilers.
Yeah, the reason I was like, because this kid ends up being
the hero.
Amazing.
Yeah,
this kid ends up being the hero, and
but up until that point, I was like,
he's a nightmare.
I was starting to think that there was no Babadook, that he had just literally driven his mom crazy, and she's like, I'm just gonna kill this situation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually one of the things that I love a lot about Australian horror movies is that slow burn, is that you're allowed to think that for 90% of the movie. For the vast majority of the movie, you're allowed to think that these folks have just gone mad, that this kid has driven this difficult child has driven his mother mad.
I mean, my sanity was beginning to wane a little bit. But then when you were sending me back just that, I thought that maybe I was an asshole. I was like, maybe am I reading this wrong?
No.
Do they not have terrible children in Australia?
Yeah, no. This was me trying not to spoil it because being like, you'll see, this kid is difficult and you will end up rooting for him because
when we say difficult, because we're assuming that everybody here has seen it.
Okay, now if you've seen it.
Yeah, but for those who have just been like, fuck it, I don't really care.
Yeah.
We're going to hang on anyways. This kid is imagine a meltdown in Walmart times 12.
Yeah,
and then
all the time.
All the time. like there's not even like, oh, there's like that 5 minutes of sweetness that like fills me up for the next week of torture.
No, it is relentless.
Have kids, they say.
Yeah, and again, that's almost par for the course for Australian horror movies once they start picking up. A lot of Aussie horror will have that slow burn where it's normal life and the tension is slowly being ratcheted up and you don't get a break. It doesn't ease off. It doesn't give you a break until it hits kind of the climax of the story, usually in the last quarter. The exception to that being Wolf Creek, that's only about 50% slow burn. But it's something that you find in a lot of the Australian horror movies where it lets you think that either everything is normal or this is something you're imagining for the vast majority of it.
So is it just like Australia trying to like gaslight the populace?
I think it's a reality thing. I think they don't, and you'll also notice in the Babadook and in a lot of other Australian movies, nobody looks too polished.
Yeah, they're just everyday people.
They just look like normal people, and I think there's
no Nicole Kidman's here.
Yeah, and even when there is, even when you have, you know, our version of A-listers.
Listen, I love your version of A-listers.
Exactly. They don't go over the top on the makeup and wardrobe. The whole point is for these to be normal people, because in the horror movies we make, it's this idea that, yeah, this could absolutely be you. This could be anyone. Especially the ones that are taken from real life situations. Mm-hmm. So when you look at Wolf Creek, which is obviously based on the serial killer Ivan Milat. When you look at, well, probably not the Babadook, but there are other ones. Wake in Fright, which is the original one from the 1970s. The whole point of that was this is a small town. This is what happens in small towns, and nobody there was too posh, too polished. So I think that's a deliberate part of it, and it ties in with all the slow burn factor that this is daily life. This is normal until the exact moment that it's not. And to me, that's what makes Australian horror one of my favorites in the subgenre.
And I keep wondering if there are things that the U.S. is trying to adopt from Australian horror, because you're talking about Wake and Fright, and it almost sounds like Lights Out.
Wake and Fright is a fascinating one that I think everybody should watch. It's quite an old movie, but it's definitely stood the test of time in that it's still scary. You watch a lot of the other old horror movies, like The Exorcist, for example.
Right.
Not really scary anymore. Like when it came out, you can totally understand why people were fleeing the theater.
Yeah.
But
now
these
I
days,
just laugh at that kid.
Right. It's pretty good. The head thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Wake and Fright. Sorry. It's because it's all good.
I was like, we're just about to start. I was about to start going into like a really bad portion of it, and I don't think we should go there.
I don't think we should go there with The Exorcist.
Yeah.
No, I know exactly which bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, Wake and Fright. It's the way that it was done. It was all about atmosphere. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in it that is inherently scary. It's the way it's shot, it's the way it's the atmosphere that they've put into the story that makes it scary. So even though it was filmed in the 70s, it's still a horrifying watch. It's still disorienting, and you feel for this guy who's stuck in this situation. You can feel his confusion and his terror at his confusion when nothing is making sense. So Wake and Fright is a young teacher from Sydney who has been sent to the outback after he's finished teachers college. So that's a pretty typical thing. You finish teachers college in Australia and you usually end up going somewhere remote for the first couple of years.
Just sent out the whoop whoop?
Yeah, basically. Quite literally.
Yeah.
Being that Whoop Whoop is an Australian city.
I know things.
Yeah, so people
I love Australia.
are always
I don't know
sent
if
out
she
to
knows
Whoop Whoop.
this yet.
So, yeah, he's been sent out to a small outback town and misses his flight back to Sydney at the end of the school year and has to wait in town for another one. And after drinking at the pub, things start to escalate in a very disorienting way.
So so it's not necessarily a horror film. Is it something where it's like testing his sanity, or?
It's a bit of both, because it's not a supernatural horror film per se. There are suggestions of that.
Right.
But it's not, there's no visible monster. The monster is other people, and it turns out himself. There is a very extremely brutal kangaroo hunt scene in the middle of the night that it is just an absolute roller coaster, because it was shot at night this is. And I would like to say no animals were harmed in the making of this movie, but they kind of were. And it was a big controversy at the time when the film was released, and still is to this day. But the scene itself is just unreal. It's extremely visceral and very difficult to watch. And it's right at the height of the tension of this, and then he just wakes up the next day and everything is different. It's definitely a tense watch, but it's because it's older.
Right.
It kind of sets the tone for the way the industry has told horror stories since, with that slow burn, the unpolished characters, and I think it all comes together to build horror films that are maybe a little bit scary. And I'm obviously biased as an Australian. I think our horror films are the scariest. But if you sit down and watch Wake in Fright and Wolf Creek is terrifying. The Babadook ratchets up the tension. I'd forgotten how scary it was. I rewatched it the other day.
It wasn't that bad, but maybe it's because I wasn't focusing fully on it. And that might have been like a defense mechanism on my part because I wasn't ready to be in my home by myself after watching The Babadook. But there were some frightening aspects, but it was so interesting because it really did make you question, was there a Babadook? Was there anything? Because I those are like my favorite kinds of movies that really make you question the reality of it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it more frightening. And but the whole thing about horror movies being of one that would love to write a screenplay for one is that ability to that slow burn to make your audience go like this.
Yes.
And then at that moment just push them right back into their seats.
Yeah.
Like and just going home, and if you can make them go home and sleep with a light on,
you've won.
You've won.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is making them believe it could really happen and pulling in that suspension of disbelief, right? And pulling in those kind of storylines where you're not quite sure if this is actually happening or not, I think goes a long way to achieving that. Because if you can convince people that what you're seeing and what you're hearing isn't what's real,
right?
You've already taken a massive leap towards that uncanny valley and bridging that gap between belief and disbelief.
Yeah, and that's where horror lives.
Yes.
Because sometimes if you watch a horror film that's so over the top, so unbelievable, it kind of leaves you like meh. Yeah. Because it's horror lives in that it could be.
Yes.
And I want to say that's kind of where we saw that Twitter post. It's kind of where Blair Witch Project lived.
Yes. Yes.
Where it was like if you spent the time, if you took the time and spent the effort, like going through that, paying attention, that when it got to the end, you were just pissing yourself.
Yeah, just all those little things. And Blair Witch, movies like the Blair Witch, they don't do the work for you. And the good ones don't do the work for you.
Right.
They leave it there for you to see, for you to notice, and for you to file away quietly. And if you haven't done that, if you're not sitting there focusing on it, the payoff is probably not as good. Right. And you'll probably walk away going, that's not scary. Whereas somebody else who was watching and really paying attention is just shitting themselves by the end of it and sleeps with the lights on. So I think horror films is a unique subgenre where you only really get as much out as you put in. If you sit down going, this isn't going to scare me, I'm not going to pay attention, I don't care, it's probably not going to have the impact. But if you sit down and go, I'm going to focus on this film, I'm going to focus on this piece of art, and let it get under your skin, the good ones can and will. Right. Yeah.
I think that's probably, not to steer away from Australian horror, just because
it's a huge genre, but yeah, we can absolutely broaden this. I could talk about it all day.
That's probably what scared the shit out of me with Paranormal Activity.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think one of the smartest things they could have done was not give the entity any type of body.
Yeah.
It was the smartest thing because
What is it? Where is it?
What is it?
Anywhere.
Where is it? And because what your brain's going to come up with is always going to be worse than what the monster guys can make.
Exactly. And all of the movies that end up not aging well or just not being that frightening are ones where they've shown the monster too soon or even shown it at all.
Right.
So the ones where the monster is people, those ones
those
land.
are the worst.
They land.
Like, and not saying the worst, like they're like
the worst.
ones, like those are the ones that like they give you the biggest anxiety. It's like, oh great, the monsters are the people we are along the way.
Yeah.
And Purge is like one of those where there's no entity. It's just people.
And another really good one for that, coming back to the Australian horror movies, is a movie called The Loved Ones, which is an Australian high school drama to begin with. It's about some high school kids getting ready for their senior formal for the prom. They're getting ready for the formal, inviting people, having crushes on each other. And the main character gets asked to the formal by this girl, and his girlfriend, the nerdy girl, the girl who nobody likes, and his girlfriend encourages him, just say yes to her. It'll mean a lot to her. Probably shouldn't have done that. He says yes, and it goes terribly. Again, are we doing spoilers for everything? I think we should do spoilers for everything. Loved Ones, pause, go away, watch it.
Leave.
Come back.
I'm here for it, though.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out that this nerdy girl and her dad have been kidnapping and killing people for generations. Their family, that's how their generation continues. Fantastic. That's how the family is built. So the dad had kidnapped somebody many years ago, and it is brutal. They drill a hole in people's heads, pour boiling water in, and it scrambles their brains. And so they have basically this puppet person who is their husband or wife.
Oh my.
And they've been doing it for generations.
So like a Stepford Wives, but like...
Yeah, but brutal.
Brutal.
Yes.
That tickles something because...
Right? It's just that kind of, oh God.
No, that's awful. And it's just...
It's awful.
It also reminds me, like, because, I mean, Americans, we all watch the crime shows. We're all addicted.
Yeah.
And one of the crime shows I used to watch was Criminal Minds.
Yes, I love that show.
One of the episodes was... a guy who had kidnapped his wife, who then had kidnapped their kids, or they had a kid, and then they had to kidnap a partner for that kid, and it was
like that, yeah.
And it was just, they were teaching, like, it was completely normal, like, this is everyday life.
Yes, and that's what it was like for these, and there's these little creepy bits before you find that out, where you're like, well, this family's maybe not quite right, but it leads you in a completely different direction. It's like, oh, maybe the dad's a bit of a creep for his daughter. Like, it leads you in that direction, and then it's like,
you start to think,
no, these are
far worse.
They are multi-generational serial killers.
Oh God.
And they're just this country family, and it's set in a country town. So in Australian country towns, it's all those big wide open spaces. And
no one can hear you scream.
Yeah, and they do.
Oh no.
It is, yeah. But it's a really fantastic story because the hero of it is the girlfriend, who comes in and realizes something bad is happening and saves the day.
She does.
Yeah, she rolls in a little Toyota Corolla or something and just absolutely fucks their shit up. It is, and nobody has any weapons, because in Australia we don't have guns, right? So people just don't have guns lying around. There's a couple, when you have things set out in the country, people usually have a shotgun or two.
For like actual protection against spiders the size of me.
Yeah, or for shooting roos.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
But like rampant.
Yeah, you might find somebody with a shotgun out in the countryside, but you're unlikely to. People just don't have guns, which I think it makes us ratchet up the brutality a bit more because having a firearm isn't a normal thing.
Right.
So what else do we do? I guess we drill holes in people's heads and pour boiling water in.
I mean, if we're gonna get.
If we're gonna do it,
just do it all the way.
Well, so The Loved Ones is fantastic because it just starts as a country town high school drama. It's like a teen movie.
And those are good. And it was one of those things where Truman Capote in his books was bringing, crime from the ghetto into the, suburban
into
house.
the suburban houses.
Yeah. And so it's all about everybody thinks the country is always the quiet place. It's everything. And so it's the easiest way to make people feel
unsettled.
Yes. And because everyone's like, oh, it's quiet, everybody knows each other, it's like a peaceful family or peaceful people, but then you have to understand that they're isolated or that you're isolated.
Yes, they're isolated, and you might know about these people, you might know their names, but do you know what happens behind closed doors? And the answer is always no.
And so what do you think it is about? Is it something that maybe is an Australian culture that is bringing that out? You mentioned something where maybe devoid of weapons is ramping up the creativity of the aspect.
I think that's definitely part of it. I think the physical, geological nature of the countryside has a lot to do with it. You don't find a lot of Australian horror that is set in cities. I mean, The Babadook was set in suburbia and is a very, very, very classic look at Australian suburbia. It's very recognisable as Australian suburbia. Most Australian horror movies, though, are set countryside, like country towns, or way out in the middle of nowhere. Wake in Fright, Wolf Creek. There was another one I suggested to you.
Loved Ones.
The Loved Ones is country towns. There was another one that's set in Tasmania. I can't quite. Dying Breed. Dying Breed is set out in the middle of nowhere in the wilds in Tasmania, because Australia is a big place with not a lot of people.
Yeah.
So once you're outside the cities and even outside the country towns, you can drive for days without seeing anybody.
And that's
big
terrifying.
and empty. Big and empty. So I mean, like, we've got the same landmass nearly as the continental US. Not nearly as many people, just a fraction of the number of people. We are one of the least densely populated countries on Earth. So I think that has a big idea, like a big part of the way we approach fear, because isolation is something that we know very well.
Right.
So it's very easy to weave that into any story we tell that you want to invoke that sense of fear. And even the stories that are set suburban, so even The Babadook, there was definitely a focus on that sense of isolation. Even though the mother had friends and family around, she was pushing them away. And they didn't want anything to do with her.
Or her kid.
She was shutting the house up. She was locking the doors. She was not letting them go outside. She pulled them out of school. It was this self-imposed isolation, but it was still that sense of being absolutely alone, which I think is another thing that's critical to a lot of the best horror movies is if you don't have your community around you, then, well, what do you do then? So I think tapping into that sense of isolation definitely helps. I'm interested in the movies that kind of flip that on its head, though. I haven't seen it yet, but I want to see Midsummer, the new Ari Aster film.
I've been hearing nothing but amazing stuff from that.
Yeah.
But I also have heard that like you're gonna need like therapy after it's done.
That sounds amazing, and I need to see it, because that flips that on its head. Because instead of being isolated, although you are out in the countryside, I believe they're out in the North Europe, but at the same time they're in a community.
Right.
It's just not their own.
Yeah, and so it kind of, I mean, so like we were saying, so horror is, getting you out of your comfort zone. And sometimes comfort zones are surrounded by people. So taking you out of that, making you feel like you don't have anywhere to run, not being able to.
No one can hear you scream.
Yeah, exactly.
Central tenet of Alien.
Exactly.
Oh, the greatest
and
film.
also, but at the same time, it's throwing you into something that you cannot navigate normally.
Yes.
And that can be culturally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what Midsummer's gonna tap into. I haven't seen it yet. I'm so excited.
And so Midsummer's coming out. Are there any horror films coming out on the Australian circuit that you've been like, maybe that has popped up?
There probably are a few, but I haven't been looking at them lately. But in terms of recent ones, if people are looking for a watch list, you've already seen. I assume you've already seen The Loved Ones and The Babadook.
And if you haven't,
although if you haven't, I haven't given away like everything to do with it.
It's still worth watching.
Yeah, The Loved Ones especially. I really, really would love if everybody can go out and watch The Loved Ones. It is severely underrated, extremely brutal.
I want all four of you to go and watch The Loved Ones.
Yep.
And then report back. There will be a quiz.
And if you like The Blair Witch, there's a movie called The Tunnel, which is another Australian horror movie, found footage, quite similar to The Blair Witch in style and tone.
And if you're going with Blair Witch with, I believe it's Ed Lopez. He did VHS 2.
Yes.
Jesus.
Which is amazing.
My gosh.
So good.
Speaking
of therapy.
Yeah, I met that man once and scolded him for
Jesus.
play killing a dog in that movie. Like no animals were harmed in that movie, but my soul was.
Yeah, they don't happen anymore. If you don't like the whole violence against animals thing, I don't. I'm not a fan of it. I have watched Wake in Fright once, and I'm never going to watch it again. It is an iconic film, but the kangaroo hunt is quite real. So if that's something that makes you sensitive,
Don't do it.
Don't do it, or just skip that
I'll
part
put a
entirely.
warning at the beginning of this going, this is about horror.
This is about horror. We discuss pretty bad things.
We're wearing Death Save shirts for a reason.
For a reason, yes.
Mainly because I didn't have a shirt that says, I don't care who dies in the movie as long as the dog lives.
Yeah, I need a shirt that says that. Yeah.
I'll get you mixed up.
Exactly. Which, again, the Babadook.
Babadook. Oh, God. Oh, no, that's right.
I'm sorry.
Repeat trauma. Dude, I had just forgotten about it. I was so happy. All right.
Oh.
On that note, is there anything else you'd like to do to close this out today?
Watch more horror films. Watch more horror films from different regions than your own because they're all distinctive and it's really fun to pick up those kind of cultural differences. And sleep with the light on.
All right, you heard it here, guys. Thanks for coming. Sleep with the light on. Hopefully we'll have more horror talks in the future. I love you guys. Bye. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to this latest episode of Nerd Out as we got down and spooky in this last week of October. Be sure to follow Variant Roles on Twitter as well as myself at Crit Charisma for more news on episodes and coming games. Tune in next week as we move from down and spooky to down and boozy with Master Brewer Taryn Winnie as we discuss the ins and outs of beer, brewing, and community. And sit back and relax as a Velvet Soiree starts at 8 p.m. Everybody have a happy and safe Halloween, and I'll see you next week.